Last episode I covered the augmentation system, but what use are cleverly crafted defensive setups without bad guys to pose a threat? Most tower defense games offer you a huge range of towers while completely overlooking the potential that well-designed enemies hold. This episode is dedicated to some of the enemies you'll encounter when you're playing Augmented. Enemies play a very important role in tower defense games. Let's first explore what makes up enemies. They are usually defined by a certain amount of hit points, movement speed, and bounty. Higher hit points are often accompanied by a bigger bounty and occasionally lower movement speed. Sometimes enemies also feature certain abilities and immunities. The purpose of enemies is to force players to find solutions to problems and spend currency. Now that we've established the characteristics of enemies, let's look at some examples. Balloons TD6 forces players to cover a range of different enemy types. Camo balloons can be attacked by camo detecting monkeys. Some monkeys can't detect camo balloons on their own, but most have a potential camo detection upgrade. Camo balloons appear relatively early and force players to prepare accordingly. Regrow balloons regenerate lost hit points over time to encourage players to increase their DPS and buy upgrades that prevent regeneration. Fortified balloons have extra hit points. Fortification can be countered by certain upgrades. Some monkeys' upgrades deal extra damage to fortified balloons or remove the fortification entirely. These different properties are often combined in later waves of the game to increase the difficulty. One of Augmented's enemy types is the flying enemy, which could be compared to BTD's camos. Flying enemies are only detectable using special augmentations. They will also typically move at a faster speed. In addition to enemy types, some enemies, mainly bosses, will have unique abilities. These abilities usually have a cooldown and can be countered using the right augmentation. Let's look at the most recently added enemy, which features an ability. The Enigmatic Soul. Enigmatic Souls have relatively low hit points and movement speed. Their ability, which teleports the Enigmatic Soul forward when it's hit, has a 5-second cooldown. They are vulnerable to one-shots from high damage instances and to spread out defenses. There are also going to be enemies that help other enemies instead of buffing themselves. My roadmap is filled with interesting enemies of this kind. A personal favorite of mine acts like a catapult. It has high HP, low movement speed, and launches passing enemies forward like a catapult. Bosses will often have more than one ability to create exciting challenges. A boss's abilities are, however, not random. I like to encourage players to pay attention to details, so as you play the levels of Augmented, you will find bits that foreshadow the traits of upcoming foes. I might show a few interesting enemies and bosses in future episodes, but I want to preserve the surprise for you, so I'll try to keep most challenges secret. If you want to join the Augmented Discord or find my socials, go to augmented-td.com.